Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the Cage Rage podcast, and we're going to do a little side project here. You know, I don't know what we're going to call it. We're going to call it the CRP Lounge, or Outside the Cage, I think is the name that is probably ultimately going to go here in terms of, you know, being the most catchy and the most useful. Everybody on the team here, and that's Chad. I think Chad's got a couple of jazz ones, and, you know, Devin and Anthony, you know, they'll hopefully contribute one, but Chad's been bugging us to do, you know, music and stuff like that, so he wanted, you know, obviously if you follow the podcast and stuff, you realize I'm an old guy and I like heavy metal and stuff, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a top 10 albums from the early years of metal, thrash metal. I don't know what you want to call this type of metal. It's like, I wasn't a Motley Crue fan as a kid, you know, I was a Metallica fan, so I think that's the difference there for a lot. Now, you know, in the 80s, obviously music, you know, we had Wasp, which was kind of like, I don't know, I thought the music was kind of heavy and not, you know, at least on the first album or so, not like the LA scene of like Motley Crue and, you know, Kicks and, you know, Trickster and that type of stuff. When you go back to the early 80s, you know, it's Motley Crue, you know, Quiet Riot and those guys, I guess, you know. But that wasn't my thing. I mean, I guess I knew the music, you liked it, but I was much more of a metalhead. So I'm going to go ahead and just get into my top 10 thrash albums, metal albums from the early 80s. And this is stuff I used to listen to as a kid. And it's funny because, you know, this shows how old, you know, this is why I didn't want to do this segment, because it just shows how old we are. You know, when we were kids, you used to think of, you know, I had a record collection, I had tons of records, so, you know, you used to think of like, oh, if I got stranded, or, you know, I can only have 10 of these, you know, which are the 10 now? You know, you got all your music on your cloud or on your phone or whatever, and you know, you don't really hurt for like, oh, you know, I can't hear that song because I don't have the record or anything like that. So I'm kind of for a completely different era and stuff like that. But it's meant to be fun, and if anybody likes metal and you like some of these albums, you can go, you know, just, hey, take it as a nostalgia blast and go back and give them a listen. And you're into music and metal and stuff like that, and you don't know the albums, you know, like I said, go back and give them a listen. They're my favorites. They're not any in particular anything outstanding and stuff, but the early 80s was a good time for this kind of music, and you know, living in New York, you happen to be accessible to see the bands and to you know, record stores and that sort of stuff. So without further ado, my number 10 metal album from the 80s, Onslaught's The Force. Now, you know, I don't know if there are a lot of people out there that dug Onslaught. You know, when I see a lot of people do retros and stuff like that, I rarely hear that band mentioned. And I think they deserve a mention just because, you know, The Force, that album came out, and they were a little bit of a Slayer, you know, sound alike. They were heading in that direction. They had, you know, their own thing and stuff, but there was something catchy about the album. And you know, one of the things that makes me solid about this album is that later on in life, you know, you know, they went away. The band, you know, put out a couple of things in the 80s and or you know, early 90s, and then went away. And then they came back, you know, about 8 or 10 years ago, and they put out just a fantastic comeback album. You know, just one of those things that, you know, I was like, hey, I remember Onslaught, and you know, The Force was starting to get out there on iTunes and stuff like that. I didn't have the record anymore, but you know, you look for it, you know, and you know, I found out that, hey, they had re-recorded and stuff like that, and that was, to me, the thing is, how good is the new album? You know what I mean? It's like, because some of the bands that have gone back and re-recorded and gotten together and stuff have really not put out a good product, right? So you know, you kind of wonder with these guys. You know, I enjoyed The Force. I thought it was a great album, and then they came out with Killing Peace, and Killing Peace is worth listening to also. It's not on this list because it's newer, and I'm concentrating on albums from the early 80s, but Killing Peace is something, and Onslaught's The Force. As a Slayer look-alike or sound-alike band, I enjoyed that. a lot, and they got named number 10 there. Number 9, Nuclear Assault's Game Over. Now, this was interesting because Nuclear Assault's one of those bands that, again, I don't know that everybody, you know, I know they're still out there, and I know Dale Lilker, the bassist, is one of those guys that, you know, I figured from the early days he'd get that kind of like an iconic role where he'd been around, you know, he was in Stormtroopers of Death, and obviously he was Anthrax's original bassist and stuff. But, you know, Nuclear Assault was a spin-off band where once he left Anthrax, he got there. You know, I think they had a terrific and unique sound. With the fact is, you know, they kind of combined metal and punk, which you kind of knew was going to happen with Lilker involved. And at the same time, you know, the thrashy kind of guitar solo-y stuff. And John Connolly's vocals are awesome, right? So, you know, Nuclear Assault, number 9, comes in with Game Over. Number 8, I've got Exciter's Violence and Force. Again, now here at the bottom, I'm picking out some of my own faves. Violence and Force. Exciter's one of those bands. They're Canadian. They came out in the early '80s, so like they predate like some of the other like bigger bands, you know, from that era. Like, and they were around. Another band with a good vocal sound and just speeding up the drums and stuff. Basically, a lot of stuff doesn't sound as heavy or anything like that as it was. But when it came out at the time, Violence and Force, you know, they had another album, Heavy Metal Maniac, that almost made the list. I think I like Heavy Metal Maniac more than anything that they had done. However, Violence and Force has Pounding Metal on it, and that song to me was the one that, you know, it was super cool to me at the time because with everything being sped up and bands trying to be fast, here was the guys that you know were also doing that, and then they put out this song which was deliberately more of a slow down song, and it's got its catchiness to it. So I went with Violence and Force, and then Exciter. The problem too with Exciter is that, you know, they kind of sold out later. It was the whole speak, you know, talk about. They did change their sound, and I think, you know, with their song themes and stuff like that, I mean, it's not great songwriting stuff. It's just kind of pump you up kind of music, you know. I think Long Live the Loud was a great album. You know, that was the kind of album that, you know, by the time that one came out, which was like '85 and stuff like that, I mean, I thought that they were ready to break out, and then they came out with, you know, much weaker offerings and like I said, a changed sound and stuff, and that really affected them. They've also mounted a comeback, and, you know, I gotta be honest, I mean, all these guys mounting a comeback, I give them credit, but, you know, they still sound a little bit, you know, canned, a bit more of the same. You know, put it this way, Onslaught, the new version of Onslaught that's out, you know, that's still put out music now, is much further along and stronger than Exciter. But for original core music from the '80s, I got Exciter at number 8 with Violence and Force. Number 7, now, just to let everyone know, I got a tattoo of this album. So, Merciful Fate's Don't Break the Oath, and just the thing about this was, you know, here's black metal and that whole, you know, genre starting and stuff, and this guy was one of the leading proponents of it. Obviously he had Venom and stuff, but this, you know, he had the upside down cross paint down his head and stuff. And the thing about it is that the vocals, you know, with King Diamond, you've got, you know, like vocals that are just, there was nothing anywhere like that, and it was not something that anyone even imitated or anything like that. So they stand alone as unique. You know, after a while, it maybe gets to be a little bit of a tired act, but Don't Break the Oath, when, you know, it first started to hit that, and then, you know, the first albums and stuff, this was legitimately, you know, cool cutting edge stuff. Now if you listen to Don't Break the Oath, it's a good rock album, you know. The guitar work and stuff, I mean, the band was good, and it's good music, but it doesn't really sound all that heavy like you thought it was. There was more of the bells and whistles, I think, with the act that Merciful Fate brought. At any rate, so there's Merciful Fate. Number 6. Now people are going to really chastise me here. This is Metallica's Kill 'Em All, and, you know, I mean, obviously now in retrospect, it's a historic album and stuff, and obviously I saw Metallica in '84, I think. So they were just releasing Ride the Lightning at that point. So Kill 'Em All was definitely a historical album. Liked it, listened to it, loved it, blah blah blah. But to me at the time, it just wasn't as catchy as some of the other stuff that was out. And Metallica, if you go from Kill 'Em All right into the Ride the Lightning album, even there was a little bit of a change in their sound, and there was talk that they'd sold out. That was around the time that Cliff Burton left the band, via untimely death, unfortunately. But that change in and of itself, was one of the big changes in Metallica. Obviously, they go on to be one of the biggest bands of all time, and definitely the biggest band from this genre. So to put them at 6, some people are going to chastise me. But that's about where I put it. I'd probably listen to Ride the Lightning more and Kill 'Em All anyway. Just back then. So number 5 album, I'm going. This was a theme album, and it's Venom's "At War with Satan," and if it comes with a 25-minute piece, which is the Declaration of War. And I just thought, for a theme album from back then, I liked it. I thought it was powerful when it came out. I thought Venom was one of those freaky bands where, I thought that they were more popular than they should be because the music didn't hold up. Not against some of the other bands, and they were, as a 3-piece, sometimes they didn't get, to sound as clean or as deliberate or as fast as, Motorhead is a much better 3-piece, I thought, obviously. So, with Venom, you could have picked any one of the early albums and stuff because they were all historic, but I like this one as the theme album, and they delivered it as the theme album. By this time, they were, already recognized and at the peak of their powers, and they delivered that, which, like I said, the 25-minute piece there makes it all worth it. Now we got a theme album there, number 4. I'm going to go with a live album. I'm going to do Motorhead's No Sleep Till Hammersmith. And obviously, I don't know if you could do a list like this and not have Motorhead on there, right? Because in any one of those early albums, again, from this band, you could have put in here from, Iron Fist to Ace of Spades to, Overkill. But I want to put a live album on here, and I think this is the one, especially from the early days, just because every band on here would probably name Motorhead as a predecessor of theirs, and somebody that, we lost Lemmy a couple years back, and there was a call to rename the Coke and Whiskey or Jack and Cokes, to rename the drink of Lemmy after him as a tribute. I think that's a fitting tribute for him. Saw Motorhead many times at L'Amour's and L'Amour's East in New York. So that was number 4, L'Amour's. Number 4, Number 4, Motorhead's No Sleep Till Hammersmith. Number 3, I'm going to go with Anthrax's Fistful of Metal. And this to me, Anthrax is a New York band. So, again, with Danny Lilker at the 9th spot, Lilker used to be in this band, and those bands, they used to play around in the New York area a lot. And Anthrax went on to really quickly become a big band. And the thing about Anthrax's Fistful of Metal is they had a singer that left the band shortly after that. And then, when Joey Belladonna arrived, that was the singer that he was much more melodic, and that was the singer that helped Anthrax break out. But before that, and again, then you get into that whole simple conversation that everybody used to have there, is like, did a band sell out and stuff? And usually if there was a big band member change, they were accused of a sellout at some point or another. And Anthrax definitely got that, especially when they came back and they were doing stuff like I'm the Man and, the rap stuff. They were a far cry from Fistful of Metal, but Fistful of Metal is it's probably the fastest of the albums here, if you like thrash and the speed metal stuff, of the albums I'm putting on here, and definitely a historic album. Anthrax at number 3 with Fistful of Metal. Number 2, Exodus, Bonded by Blood. This is probably a personal choice, but I always see, when they name the top 4 bands from this era, you got, I'm going to exclude Megadeth from this, right? So, But Exodus is one that sometimes is on the list, sometimes isn't. I consider, them to be tremendous. This first album, was again delivered at the same time as some of the 83 in that era and stuff like that. So you're talking about, when you hear it and you're hearing that type of music and speed for the first time, it really was, a strong album. I'll tell you another thing that, points it out and makes it something that you could worth listening to. Two things. First, obviously Gary Holt still around. I mean, at some point he covered with Slayer and he's been all over the place. And Exodus has always been his pet project. I mean, there you're talking about a guy who's, a legit musician. Not that everybody here is a legit musician, but here you're talking about another guy who took the metal craft to another level in Gary Holt. So this is worth watching, listening to. Bonded by Blood, their Exodus' first album. Another thing that makes it interesting is, again, a couple of years back, they didn't remaster this album. They re-recorded it with modern equipment, and it really does hold water. It sounds much more powerful, much more up to date, and it does hold water. And I think that's what makes it an interesting listen back to the original, and then listen to the new version, that they released here. Afterwards. Hold on, I'm going to look up the name of the new, because if the first one's obviously Bonded by Blood, and then with the re-release, they have a play on the name. I don't want to get it wrong, so give me one moment here. It was re-released as Let There Be Blood. So that answers the question. So you got Exodus, Bonded by Blood, number 2. Number 1 to me, and it sounds almost melodic now, but it's just an awesome album, and it's Slayer's Show No Mercy. I saw Slayer on the, it was called Haunting the Chapel, was the tour that came right after they released Show No Mercy. They released an EP called Haunting the Chapel, so, they went from an opening band at L'Amour's to headlining and on the Haunting the Chapel tour, and if I remember correctly, it was the Cro-Mags that opened for them. So, and that to me, Slayer's still the band I go to for music from that era as the number 1 band. So just to recap, Slayer's Show No Mercy, number 1. Exodus, Bonded by Blood, number 2. Anthrax, Fistful of Metal, number 3. Motorhead, No Sleep Till Hammersmith, number 4. Venom's At War With Satan, number 5. Metallica's Kill 'Em All, number 6. Merciful Fate's Don't Break the Oath, number 7. Exciter's Violence and Force, number 8. Nuclear Assault's Game Over, number 9. And Onslaught's The Force, number 10. I'm Miguel Iturrate for the CRPA. If you're listening to this, you're probably into heavy metal. That's cool. We want to delve into a little bit of different subjects besides fighting and combat sports and stuff like that. Just one of the tasks at hand, I figured I'd rely on music that we can always, talk about. Feel free to comment, like, and do all that sort of stuff. We also did an interesting podcast a little while back with Chad about ring entrances and the fights, selections that fighters use for music to walk in the ring. And we had some interesting metal selections and conversations that popped up around there. I guess that was the source and reason for this podcast. So if you like it, let us know, and we'll keep it going. Always good to take a break and put on some music and clear your head. So we kind of do that edgy over here. I guess metal's not even edgy anymore, right? I'm an old guy and I like old heavy metal. It's like also another way to date ourselves and age ourselves. But it's all good. If we didn't have the experience, we wouldn't be able to deliver all the fight news either. So I'm Miguel Iturrate for the CRP. Heavy metal forever,